Showtime. Welcome to the show, everybody. I'm Brent Holland. Settle in your most comfy chair tonight. Get the coffee going, get the tea going, or a beverage of choice. We got a great show for you tonight. Legendary JFK researcher and author David Lifton returns, and I'm happy about that after all this COVID stuff is finally over with, I hope. Although, as I say this, we're about to embark on a brand new Omicron variant. So, anyways, more on that later. Also joining us tonight is attorney Bill Blackwell. David Lifton, of course, is a graduate of the Cornell University School of Engineering Physics and worked on the Apollo space program. Yes, he worked on the Apollo space program. Absolutely. He is the author of a book that has inspired just about every researcher and follower of the JFK assassination conspiracy I've ever spoken with. And that book, of course, is the bestseller, Best Evidence, Disguise, and Deception in the Assassination of John F. Kennedy. Bill Blackwell, my friend, is a graduate of the University of Colorado and Western State University College of Law. Blackwell spent the majority of his legal career practicing entertainment law, the attorney to the stars, folks, in Los Angeles, and moved to Nevada near Lake Tahoe. Okay, David, let's jump in right away. I've received a zillion questions, a zillion Facebook posts, a zillion emails, a zillion phone calls on your new book that's entitled Final Charade. How close to release is it?
I don't know. I'm
Good answer.
going as fast as I can. There's two parts to the book. Let's put it this way. One part of the book is they're both really totally original and new. They have not really been discussed publicly, and so I'm always careful about what I say, okay? So let me start with the second part of the book, okay? I originally thought that there were going to be separate books, but I'm putting this into one book. First of all, I'm much further along in my age, and second of all, it's possible to say quite a bit in one book. And I'm not really concerned if the book doesn't explain 100% because I can always supplement it with an auxiliary volume and stuff like that. Okay, second part of the book deals with Oswald, and you might call it the first time anybody's published a comprehensive picture of Oswald from the standpoint that he was innocent. This is really important to understand. My view, and I'll abbreviate my own name. I'll refer to myself in the third person by my initials, DSL, okay? David Samuel Lifton. I do not believe that Oswald fired any shots at Kennedy that day. Okay, he's not responsible for the assassination. He's used as the unwitting patsy, but he's not responsible for the murder of Kennedy. There's a whole theory and a whole bunch of data you have to understand to get inside his state of mind and what he thought he was doing that day. Because in March, before November 22nd, he did order a rifle. And there's no question that it was made to appear that that rifle was the murder weapon, but that's only because after the shooting, President Kennedy's body was covertly altered. And by that, I mean bullets were removed, and they messed with the wounds on the body, removed bullets to make room by putting that bullet on a stretcher and two fragments in the front seat of the car, of the limo, that his rifle that he had ordered the previous March was the murder weapon, okay? So that is a starting point, you might say. It's because the ballistic and medical evidence was fabricated that I have every reason to believe, and I'm totally confident when I tell you that Oswald was innocent of shooting President Kennedy. Now, the problem is that Oswald, his bio, he did a lot of things that were very unusual for a person at his time. For example, you don't just get out of the Marines and then go to the Soviet Union and live there for 2.5 years. That has to be understood. What the heck was he doing over there? Was he just a curiosity? He decided he wanted to go there and live for 2.5 years? 2 3/4 years? Yeah, it's possible. That's it. That's the innocent explanation. That's as innocent as you can get. But I don't think that's what's going on, because Oswald had a covert assignment. He was connected with the government. And so he, besides wanting to live in the Soviet Union and for 2.5 or whatever number of years, he was there 37 months, I think it was, he had an intelligence assignment pertaining to radar, which was his military specialty. But that's really not important in a way. You know, if we knew his assignment, I don't think it would make very much sense in terms of what happened in Dealey Plaza to, you know, a year and a quarter after he returned. He returns in June 1962 on a boat run by the Holland America line. And by that time, he's met Marina. She's on the boat with him. There's obviously people who want him to get back to the U.S. as soon as possible, ASAP, as they say, if you're sending a package. So they wanted him home. And if he had an assignment, that's the reason they really wanted him home, because they can't have the assassination of Kennedy without a pre-selected patsy. You just can't do it. Otherwise, think about what the wire service reports would look like. President Kennedy was shot. He's dead, and we don't know who did it. Or if we have a name for the guy, you absolutely have to have coordination between who this pre-selected patsy is and what he's doing on 11/22. I mean, if Oswald's not a controlled agent, and that's one way of saying it, if Oswald is not a pretend Marxist, and if he doesn't have a handler, let's say he was completely disconnected with the events, you can't have announcements on November 22nd, within 30 minutes of the shooting, that Oswald's the assassin if Oswald's got a 9-to-5 job in Toledo, Ohio. You know, so if he's part of a setup, he has to have a handler. I mean, otherwise you're leaving everything to coincidence, and that is absolutely not what happened. Everything was not left to coincidence. So there's the Oswald part of the puzzle. Now, I said that was part two. Let me go back to part one. Part one is the autopsy, the body of President Kennedy, which tells the truth about the shooting, simply because that's what the body is. It's the target of the assassins. And basically, if you get the target after the shots were fired, you can see how many shots hit the target. That means how many entries are on the body. And if there's ballistic evidence, bullets inside, you'd retrieve the bullets and send them to the FBI lab. And you'd want to compare those bullets with the rifle that was found in the building, which Oswald ordered the previous March. So that's the sort of thing we're dealing with. We're dealing with that. Now, there's another part, which I should really mention, which is that it was planned in advance to alter the president's body. And you can say, well, how could you plan something in advance? Well, if you go to the original news accounts and conduct the interviews that I've conducted, you'll understand why that's entirely possible. Because President Kennedy, in the original reports, and I have some stuff that most people do not have, say that President Kennedy died in surgery. In other words, he lived long enough to get to the hospital, they say. And then once at the hospital, he was brought into the emergency room, ER. And then from ER, he went on an elevator up to the second floor, I think it was operating room. And then the original reports say he died in surgery. In other words, he did not die in the ER, he died in the OR. And the importance of that is that if he dies in the OR, that's where you can get the bullets out, under the disguise or under the pretense that you're doing legitimate surgery. Now, the question then comes, how can you get him up to the OR? If he arrives in the Parkland Hospital and he's already dead, the dead go to the morgue. The living, if you need an operation to remove bullets or do surgery on your abdomen or even neurosurgery on your head, if you're still alive, you don't go to the morgue. You go upstairs to an operating room. And original reports indicate that that's where he supposedly died. Now, that's not true. We all know that didn't happen. He was pronounced dead in the ER. But the point is, those accidental reports, to me, indicate what was supposed to happen but did not. That's a concept that's really important to all my work in Final Charade, is to understand what was supposed to happen but did not, and what is the evidence trail for making such an assertion. Okay? In other words, can I find the blueprint? Can I tease out of the record the blueprint or the design of what was supposed to happen but did not? Now you have to ask yourself then, well, David Lifton, if you're going to say that he went up to the OR, and he's dead, how did that work? And I'm telling you right now that I have that all figured out, and I have new documents on that. He was never supposed to stop in the ER. What was supposed to happen was that he was right after the shooting, within 30 seconds, 40 seconds, a couple of minutes at most. The limousine was going to go under the underpass, get off at a certain exit, use the service road, and Kennedy was to be transferred to an ambulance. Now, that's new. It'll be developed in Final Charade, the ambulance transfer. And we're not talking about the innocent ambulance driven by Aubrey Reich, who you will find in the best evidence video. I'm talking about another ambulance that plays a critical role. And if he was transferred to that ambulance, which was the plan, but did not happen, but if he's transferred to the ambulance, you can then skip the ER. So you might say, well, what do you mean you can skip the ER? How can you get to the hospital with Kennedy in an ambulance and not go directly to the ER? How can you go directly to the OR? Well, there's a magic trick you do. And the answer is you pretend he's alive when he's dead. And then you have every right to laugh and say, well, how do you do that? And the answer is, well, in the ambulance, you intubate him. And it's really important for people who want to know more about this to simply go to Google and look up intubation and read about it. Devote 5 minutes to reading about what happens in a hospital when you're intubated. Well, first of all, they stick the breathing thing on your face, and then if you take that off, they put an endotracheal tube into your mouth to get air into your lungs. And of course, in the case of Dallas, that was done immediately by the first doctor that saw him. But then Dr. Perry, who was not involved in any of these magic tricks, removed the endotracheal tube and did what any physician would have done. He made a tracheotomy. Okay? So, and then he realized he's dead. Harry has the realization that he's done a tracheotomy on a corpse. Kennedy was already dead. He was very upset. Obviously, it's not his practice to do a tracheotomy on a corpse. And he washed his hands of it. And that was the end of it. Kennedy, Secret Service then had a problem. He was not pronounced. There had been no possibility of removing the bullets because they hadn't gone to surgery. So that's the situation in Dallas. Now, the question is, how are you going to pull off all this nonsense in Dallas? And the answer is that it was planned in advance to transfer Kennedy immediately after the shooting into an ambulance. And I have the evidence for that, which is too detailed to go into on the show, and I don't want to get into all the details of it, but that's basically the plan in advance, to treat Kennedy when he was dead as if he was still alive. And you do that by putting him in an ambulance and intubating him. That's basically part of the evidence that I have, that this is what the intention was for the plot. And I'm saying to you that the evidence is really good on this point, for what was planned and which did not happen. It's as good as if you had handed me a manila folder and it was typed out. I mean, it's that good. And I spent quite a bit of time on this, so I know about this. That's the plan. The plan did not work. Now, one of the reasons the plan did not work, you might say, well, what do you mean it didn't work? Is that there was an extra victim in this affair. And the victim that was unexpectedly shot was Governor John Connolly. So the plans that were made could not be executed. I mean, I'll be very careful about this when I tell you, we're very clear about this, that if that car had pulled over anywhere and Kennedy was transferred to an ambulance, Nellie Connolly would say, what the hell are you doing? My husband's in my lap. Why are you taking this man whose brains have just been shot all over the back seat and putting him into this ambulance? What about me? What about John? Okay, so that's one of the keys to understanding what was supposed to happen but did not, and it concerns the ambulance transfer. The ambulance transfer never took place, but I have excellent evidence that it was supposed to take place. And there were some reporters who were actually briefed on this before the fact. There's one or two dirty, in the intelligence language, you say someone's dirty if they have foreknowledge. And there's no question that there were people with some foreknowledge and who accidentally talked about it. And it ended up in a public record that I have. That A, he was to be transferred to an ambulance, and B, he was to be intubated in the ambulance. So that's the essence of what had happened. Now, the idea that this was going to happen when Kennedy stepped off that plane, this ambulance to which he was going to be transferred actually ends up in the public record by accident, because there were certain radio transmissions that were made, and which I now have. And if we have those radio transmissions, you see the general outline again of what was supposed to happen but did not. And the whole thing is complicated by the fact that there's an extra victim. They had to deal with Connolly. They couldn't stop somewhere and transfer Kennedy to an ambulance because that's part of some subterfuge. Well, Mrs. Connolly, Mrs. Connolly knew Kennedy was dead. It was obvious. And I forget what her exact words were, that Kennedy, because she saw the headshot, or she saw the results of the headshot with the blood and brains of Kennedy being spattered all over the rear seat. So she knew he was dead, and they couldn't stop to execute some subterfuge. They can't stop the car and say, yes, we know your husband's still alive, but we have a plot to attend to. So please let us do what we have to do. I mean, you can get into some pretty black humor scenes here. I mean, the fact is that the plot failed, and the plot failed as it was intended to unfold. It failed because one of the reasons was because Connolly was shot by accident. So once you have Connolly being shot by accident, when I say by accident, I mean unexpectedly. And we can get in that. Can't write about this without having a theory, and I don't want to get into that theory, in this show. But I can assure you that in the contingency planning that was made in connection with this murder, I guess nobody thought of the idea that events would go so haywire that the governor would be shot. First of all, there's a whole line of evidence that Connolly was not supposed to be in the car. Lyndon Johnson went to some lengths to get him out of the car. Here, John, come to this car, sit with me, blah, blah, blah. Or at least get Nellie out of the car, because, you've got some sharp shooting going on here, because you've got JFK and his wife, Jackie. You've got Nellie in that. And the idea is they're supposed to pick off JFK without injuring anybody else. Didn't work. Connolly got hit. And as a matter of fact, there's little question in my mind that Connolly was hit from the front, just the way JFK was hit from the front, in the neck and in the head, as evidenced by the back wound, the exit wound at the back of the head. The evidence that Connolly was hit from the front is right there in the record, and I've examined the documents. People haven't paid attention to such things as, what was Connolly's chest? What did it look like? Something was done to Connolly before he was released to go upstairs to surgery. And I'll tell you that the first doctor to see Connolly is not the way the record shows, because there's some other one or two doctors that were in there. And I've interviewed one of them, and I've got the records. And the way you can prove it is that Connolly was hit from the front by a bullet that caused his ribs to bend inward. And by the time Dr. Shaw got to the body, which, by the way, was not 1 or 2 or 3 or 5 or 10 minutes, the Shaw operation, which is called a thoracotomy, an exploratory operation on the chest. By the time Dr. Shaw does his thoracotomy, he makes note of the fact that 6 inches of Connolly's rib is missing. I mean, where'd it go? And when I used to give lectures on this, giving people a little peek at the evidence and what lie beneath the surface. And I used to say, where did this 4 to 5 or 6 inches of rib go? to start a second story of mankind. I mean, that was the way I used to talk about it. You cannot suddenly have 6 inches of rib missing, and I have some great taped interviews with Dr. Shaw. Well, Dr. Shaw, where do you think the rib went? And Shires too, I think. Where do you think the rib went? Was it in the car? No. Do you think it was in his clothing? No. And I go through a whole checklist. The rib is gone because there was medical work done on Connolly before Dr. Shaw got to his operation, which was at 12:38, as I recall now. No, 1:38. In other words, Kennedy assassination's at 12:30. Car arrives at the hospital. There's all kinds of buzzing around the body and things going on between 1 and 1:15, 1:20. The anesthesia to Connolly is not administered until 1:12, as I recall. I'm really lying on my memory, but I remember that number, 1:12. And the actual legitimate thoracotomy does not start until 1:37. How do you explain that? The guy comes in wounded, needs an operation. Nobody's looked at these times. Nobody's put this stuff on a timeline the way I have, and then matched it with certain radio transmissions I have. And then the whole story becomes very clear. And when you look at the Zapruder film, it becomes really clear. If Connolly was not in that car, it would have been much easier. If Mrs. Kennedy had not gone on the trip, but she, when she lost the baby, she insisted she wanted to make, it was a really lovely story. She wanted to make Jack happy, go with him politically, blah, blah, blah. So she's on the trip. And the result of all this is that you have a much more complicated situation that could ever have been part of the planning. I think if you went to a normal assassination person who's paid a lot of money to be a good sharpshooter, he would find it very difficult to predict that he would have a high probability of success shooting into a car with the president, his wife, the governor, and his wife on jump seats, and that nothing would go wrong. You wouldn't want to do that. But I guess that who was ever behind this said the hell with it. They threw the dice, and that's the way they planned the shooting. They certainly didn't intend to shoot Governor Connolly. That's for damn sure. So, so that's part of the whole business of pulling a deception off at Parkland Hospital to pretend he's alive when he's dead to get him up to the OR. Okay, and I've got a lot of some very good evidence about that. So now that's the medical part of the case, or the autopsy part. It was however you want to view it. The other part of the case is Oswald. And that's a really interesting story because Oswald left the Marines on a date that's easy to remember. He checked out on 9/11 of 1959. And by October 16th, he's appearing in Moscow, at the American Embassy. And the whole question is, how did he get there so fast? I mean, there's a whole story about that. And you have to know about what Oswald was doing. And one of the things he wanted to do, and I believe this is true, he wanted to go to these historically important spots which deal with the founding of the Soviet Union, okay? And I am now talking about Lenin's trip from Helsinki, Finland, I think it was, and going on the railroad trip from Helsinki, I've got this right, to Moscow. And he took that trip by rail. And, and then when you get to the Soviet Union in those days, you just couldn't get off, say, oh, I like my baggage and where's my Hertz rent-a-car? That's not the way it worked. They assigned you, that woman, what's her name? I forget her name right now. But she was a very lovely woman and she spoke, fluent Russian. She was with the name escapes me right now, but she was with the Intours people. And so he had a guide all the time with him. And he had to explain to this guide, he gets off the train. Can you imagine? She says, well, would you like to go to the museum? You want to go to this museum, the such and such museum? Do you want to go here? No. Well, what is it you want to do? He says, I want to defect to the Soviet Union. I want to defect to the workers' paradise. The workers' paradise. And she actually believed him, and she helped him write the letter that goes to the Presidium, where Oswald lucked out again, because the first thing they wanted to do is, this guy's crazy. Like even the top guy, there's some great remark in the record that how does he not know that our system doesn't work? That it costs too much to buy an orange or a banana. Listen, I know some of these stories where it was because my father was born in Russia, okay? And my father and his 4 brothers were born in Russia. And I was just reading the family history written by my eldest of the 5 brothers, who came over here in 1893, I think. And then the other 4 came over. And I've now got the file of those letters, which is very interesting because,
David, tell us about that. Was that to escape the pogroms?
Yeah, among other things, yes. Oh, yeah. And they had a horse and they had this and they had a vegetable garden and they would, they eked out an existence that way. And yes, the pogroms were part of it. And I heard these stories when I was a young boy about the risk, to my father and his family. But they got out. But the first one to come over here was the eldest. He kind of paved the way and learned the ropes and all the rest of it. And he was my Uncle Ben. And I knew him very well, obviously. I mean, he's my uncle. First of all, I lived next door to him. When we moved to Rockaway Beach, New York, our next door neighbor on there was the ocean to one side of the house. There was the beach and the ocean. And to the other side was Uncle Ben. And I used to talk to him. Now, all these people were very successful when they came over here, the 5 brothers. I mean, my father, Al, and he was the youngest of 5. And one year earlier was Irving. Al and Irving went into business and they formed a company which is still in business today because it was taken over by one of the cousins, which was fine. I mean, I did not want to go into the electrical supply business selling lighting fixtures, to wives and other people who had just bought houses. And the reason I could never do that was 2 things beckoned to me, which were both very exciting. First of all, I was part of the Apollo program. And I can assure you that selling lighting fixtures and all that, they're very nice people, but that didn't compare to going to the moon. That's number one. And second of all, I got involved with Professor Liebler over at UCLA, and I found this remarkable FBI report that said the president's body was altered prior to autopsy. So between those 2 things, I was hooked. And when Liebler sent the memorandum about my discovery to Chief Justice Warren, the week or 2 after I made the discovery, and we were buddies by that time, I mean, it was astounding what I had found, that an FBI report given to the commission, which they had in their files and which they didn't understand, said there had been surgery of the head area, namely in the top of the skull, prior to the official autopsy. I mean, and then the doctors can't find any bullets, and the actual FBI agents there, in their report, actually have 2 mentions of this, but one of them goes, they were at a loss to explain why they could find no bullets. I mean, the whole thing is ridiculous in a way. So anyway, yeah, my father and his 4 brothers came over here on a separate transport, a separate means of going over here. You had to prepare meals. Recently, my uncle, one of my cousins, gave me a file, and I was just reading it in the last few days. And you really get into it because we're dealing in a world where, you don't go from A to B in a car. You have a horse, And so the whole business of how they got the vegetables, my grandma on my father's side was a good cook, and she was lovely and very good-hearted, and they all loved her. She was an angel. I met her before she died, fortunately, so I had the chance to talk to her a little bit. So I don't know exactly where I was in the story, but I want you to know that these 5 boys came over here, and and they came over about 1910, I think, maybe 1913. I'm not sure, but it's amazing because you watch the movie, which I was watching last night. It just turns out I was watching Dr. Zhivago on TV, and there's the dramatization by Warren Beatty of the Bolshevik Revolution. I mean, it's very exciting, even to this day, to watch that. It's extraordinary filmmaking by with the International on the soundtrack. And my father and his brothers were not communists at all. They were merchants, and they each made their success. My Uncle Ben was in the clothing business, and another one was in real estate, and 2 brothers went into electrical supplies, and Morris was in plumbing supplies. But I mean, the thing is that when you go to the movie, to me, it was like the missing link to really understand what was going on in Russia. Watch Warren Beatty's film. It was just stunning.
It was called Reds, actually, that one. Dr. Zhivago was beforehand.
You're absolutely right. And I just made a mistake.
That's okay. That's fine. I do them all the time too. Not to worry. Not to worry. I make mistakes
I
all
was
the time.
watching Reds. No, I was watching Reds, and the scenes were amazing in that. Now, I
Yes,
first saw that movie about whenever it was. I forget when it was released, 91. I saw that movie 10 years ago. The woman in my life at the time was basically, I mean, she wasn't a member of the Communist Party, but she was, for all practical purposes, a deeply read, person. And the reason she was that, because she was brought up in a home, because her father was the youngest member of the Abraham Lincoln Brigade. So they went to Spain to fight the fascists in 1937 or 8, whatever the year was. And it was really interesting because I'd never met. I mean, you read about stuff like this, but I'd never really met someone who was such a dyed-in-the-wool Marxist. So you have the 26 volumes in the story of Oswald, and it's all very abstract, right? I mean, you have testimony. Then I got to meet Marina. You probably know that, or you don't know it. And I did a really important filmed interview with her, and we, for a very modest sum of money, we released it on hard copy. So today it's on the internet, and you can see Marina, who's basically a white, what do you call it? A white. She's not a red. She's a
White Russian.
A white Russian, correct. And why she's a white Russian, and you really know this stuff. The whole texture of what happened with Oswald. He goes there, he defects. It's a phony defection. He wants to live in Minsk. He's curious as hell. He has literary ambitions. Maybe he'll someday write about it. Blah blah blah. And then he meets Marina. And believe me, I mean, if you go back to your college years, to the first time you really met an extraordinarily sensual, sexy woman, that's what happened with Oswald. And I can tell you that based on the fact that I got to know Marina so well. And of course, that really made the whole thing come alive. I wasn't reading about it in a book. I mean, I knew the woman. She would call me up. The reason she would call me up as often as she did is that my book, Best Evidence, was published in 81. Now, she's technically inclined. She was trained as a pharmacist. And so she could follow the arguments. And I was on my book tour, and I was in Fort Worth. I think it was WFAA. I'm not sure or was it KRLD? It's one of the big stations. There were 3 of them. CBS, KRLD, and the FAA was the ABC. But anyway, I was handed a note at the end of my interview. There's a woman out in the lobby that wants to speak to you. So I went out in the lobby, and there was Marina, who up until that time, you must understand, said, yes, my husband did it. It's really important to understand that. And then a lot of people didn't like her because she said, hey, my husband had the rifle. He did this. He would practice with the rifle, da-da-da-da-da. Then out comes his book, Best Evidence, and says, all of this is false because the body was altered. She could understand that. So she wanted to meet me. So we met. And I said, everything you're saying is really important, but I'd like to get you on camera. So she agreed. And there was a wonderful filmmaker who, very, very talented, who does commercials basically for products. And his name was Michael Grasso. And he really made a beautiful impression on Marina and her husband, Ken. I forget his last name. Well, now she's Porter, Kenneth Porter. And she met him and they got married and they have a child of their own. But her two daughters are, the youngest one was Rachel and the oldest one was June. Rachel was about 4 or 5 weeks old. No, Rachel was born on October 18th, 1963. So she was 6 weeks old, or about approximately, but at the time of the assassination. Now, after Marina's interview with me was aired, Rachel, either she called me up or I called her, and she was absolutely interested in doing the interview. And I said, we really have to do an interview and make this part of the record. What bothered me is that if I didn't do it fast, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, different researchers would be calling her up. And God knows, once you do the interview, and this as a broadcaster, can you imagine, it's like eating a meal which is already, chewed on. I would like to get her and be the first. So Rachel said yes. And we met, and in Austin, Texas. She's a really interesting person. I think she's now married to a doctor, and she has 1 or 2 children. I'm not sure, but she was very interesting because she was so energetic. She's the kind of person who would much prefer to be a waitress, earning her money on tips and running around from one table to another, than sitting in an office doing some kind of office work. She was very, very energetic. And now, where was I in the story? So she.
You were talking about the 3 kids, and you'd met Marina, and you interviewed her. You were the first one to interview her.
That's right. And then Rachel. And then in the interview with Rachel, and I've never really aired this stuff. I think we maybe aired a little bit of it on hard copy when she was on hard copy, but that's not representative of the whole interview. I mean, when Rachel saw the evidence that her father was probably set up, and when she understood that evidence, and she realized that what was in best evidence was truthful and to be relied upon, rather than this whole crazy case against Oswald, which is based on a false autopsy because Kennedy's body was altered, okay? And that's resulted in a false diagram of the shooting and everything. That's what I like to say about it. She starts to cry. I mean, she was really upset, and it was very touching because I gave her the evidence on which she could take to the bank, and she knew with absolute certainty that her dad did not kill President Kennedy. Then we held a party for her, and I could start naming people, it doesn't matter, but we held a party for her in Hollywood, and we had about 20 people there, including some reporters. It was really quite lovely. And I know her life changed after that. Now, of course, one of the problems in this area is there's an envy and competition. And as soon as it got out that I had done this, people who were, this is in the Kennedy movement, there's a lot of cattiness. And, Rachel started getting approached with all these crazy stories. And one of the crazy stories was that we had some beautiful still photographs of her, and one of them appeared in a Spanish magazine. And I forget the name of the magazine, but it was one of the big ones published in Madrid. And, somebody had this crazy idea, and he's spreading this rumor that I got paid a huge amount of money for the publication of this one picture, which was ridiculous. And she got angry. I mean, in other words, the proverbial they, painted a false picture of me. And it, for all practical purposes, was not that incident. It was another incident. And I don't want to name names, especially since if they're alive, I don't want to get in an argument with them. And if they're dead, I don't want to, insult the dead. But I had to deal with this kind of thing. Anyway, I wish her well. Marina, when I was on my book tour, I don't think she ever lost faith in me, because especially, not only did I have the answer, and she was the one who knew her husband, obviously, I convinced her that he was involved in what's called role playing. And he was playing this role of the assassin. So if you got some guy with a theatrical streak, and if he had gone to college, you can bet that he would have majored in, among other things, drama. He loved it. He loved method acting. And that's why I think when he was pitched this ridiculous assignment on November 22, 1963, he was not going to shoot anybody. I'm almost certain that he was firing blanks, first of all. And I have reasons for believing that. But
so just to clarify, David, just for a second, you believe he was in the 6th floor depository, in this quote-unquote sniper's nest, is that correct?
I believe he was. No, let me be very specific about this.
Sure.
I believe that somebody poked something out of that window, and you have a division of labor here. If they had Oswald sufficiently, not hypnotized, but sufficiently to buy into this idea that he's a secret agent with an assignment, to fake an assassination, all that, could he have been the person who was sticking that thing out of the window? Yes, he could have. But then you'd have to say about Howard Brennan, the famous eyewitness. Brennan made a correct identification. On the other hand, if Oswald was upstairs and the handler said, look, you're too nervous about this, or you're too giggly about it, or whatever, here, we'll do it. but then you have to get the hell out of here because we want to meet you down in the lunchroom afterwards. Because the setup of Oswald, that he was to die within a minute or two of the assassination, to me is very clear. I mean, he's downstairs. I have reason to believe, by the way, which I'll put into Final Charade. But I believe I understand where Oswald was at the time of the shooting. And I don't want to get into it in too much, but I know where he was. And then he ran from where he was, which was to the west side of the building. He ran in the back entrance and then upstairs one flight to the lunchroom. So the idea that he was upstairs on the 6th floor is not mandatory for my belief, because they're going to alter the body anyway. The question is, who poked the gun out of the window? Well, I don't know. But it could it be Oswald? Yes. For many years, I believed he was so mind screwed. There's a more way of saying it. But anyway, he was so credulous and believed his assignment. Could he have done it? Yes. Do I think he was at the window with the rifle? No. Because I think they got somebody to stick something out of the window. And I just don't trust Howard Brennan's testimony for all the reasons that have been discussed in books on the assassination. So anyway, he ends up on the 2nd floor, as you know. And his first thing that happens, as soon as the shots are fired, this police officer in the motorcade pulls over his motorcycle, and he runs up the front entrance, and he says to Roy Truly, "Take me upstairs." He wants to go upstairs.
Marion, I forget his last name. Forgive me. The police
Marion
officer.
Baker.
Thank
Marion
you.
Baker.
Thank you.
So Baker is following. Baker says, "Follow me." No, excuse me. Truly says, "Follow me. I'll take you upstairs." Between the 3rd and 4th floor, 2nd and 3rd floor, Truly realizes that Baker is not following him. So he goes down one flight to the 2nd floor, and he inches over and he sees inside the lunchroom that Baker is in there with his gun pointed at Oswald's stomach, and Oswald's just gotten a Coke out of the machine. And I don't want to, screw this up. Either he was about to put the nickel in or whatever it is in the machine, or he had gotten the Coke and was holding it. It doesn't matter. It's, 6 of one and half a dozen. So Truly walks into the lunchroom and says, he sees the fact that his employee, who had been a Marine, and, he was supposedly pitched to him for the job on October 16th by Ruth Payne, who called up and said, "We got a guy who, had been in the Marines, who was in the service. His wife's expecting a baby, to have a job opening, blah, blah, blah." So he Truly immediately pipes up and says, "He works here." And so Baker has to reholster his gun. Okay. And by the way, Oswald must have had a tremendous amount of confidence or something in his psyche. Can you imagine having a gun thrown in your belly and what the heck is going on here? But anyway, so where was I in the story? In
the 2nd floor lunchroom.
Yeah,
Oswald
right.
just got a coat, and Marion
So
Baker
Oswald,
had a gun.
Right. So now he gets out of there, and he wants to get the hell out of the area, which is what he does. He gets out of the building, and then there's the question of how he leaves Dealey Plaza. Okay, well, what happened is, I don't know where he was in the building, where he was sitting at in the cafeteria, but what happened is a station wagon pulls around, and the first time this was developed in detail was in Josiah Thompson's 6 Seconds in Dallas years ago, and I'm sure he's going to republish part of this, and I hope he does, because it's a great story. But I mean, Oswald lets out a huge whistle, so there's some premeditation. The station wagon guy, sees him, pulls the station wagon over, and Oswald hops in and is driven by a dark-skinned man. We don't know whether that means Mexican, Cuban. I mean, and I don't want to be accused of any kind of racial thing. Maybe it's a white guy who'd gone to the beach and had a good suntan. But whatever it was, they race away in the station wagon. Now, the way the commission handled this, and I think they really screwed it up royally. Now, the question is, where was Oswald? He's in the station wagon, if you believe that report. And there's a couple of documents, because there was a Nash Rambler. There were other documents that saw the station wagon incident, and I forget the guy's name, but he almost bumped into the station wagon because the guy had to put on the brakes to pull over. So we have good evidence of that, him getting into the station wagon. But other witnesses said he got on a bus going west on Elm Street. Now, what I don't understand, because, I'm smart, but I'm not a genius, okay? So back in 19, whatever it was, when I got my set of 26 volumes, I had to get a sense of this. So I had to get a good map. So I went to the AAA. I mean, this is not exactly rocket science, right? So I went to the AAA. Well, maybe I sent for it for $1. I don't remember. I got a nice map of Dallas. And I look at it and I say, hey, look at this. When you go under the underpass and you turn right and you're on Continental, you can get off Continental at Murphy Street and go down and you can be at the bus station. In other words, it was absolutely possible for Oswald to get into the station wagon and then go over to Murphy Street, exit the station wagon, and go to the bus. Now, we know he got on the bus. How do we know that? Because he's knocking furiously on the bus door, and I forget the bus driver's name. Do you remember his name? This is what happens when you get older. But anyway, the bus driver's name, anyway, it can be found. So he puts his nickel in the thing, he sits down, and on the bus is the lady who rented him the rooming house when he first arrived in Dallas, Mary Bledsoe. And so, we have her statement. So we know he was on the bus, and then after a little while, he exits the bus. And now what's significant about this is that he didn't want to stay on that bus. And I think his instincts were good, because if you look at a series of FBI reports that the commission has, which I found these in some file, as soon as he leaves the bus, within a couple of minutes, a whole bunch of Dallas police or people in Dallas police uniforms are on the bus and taking names and checking to see if one of them had a gun, blah, blah, blah. So it's clear. And by the way, the fact that someone's in a Dallas police uniform does not mean they're a Dallas Police Department. Not that day. It was like Abraham Zapruder said, the police, they were running behind me. Yeah, sure. There were no police except one guy, Officer Haygood. The idea that there were a dozen police that were running behind Zapruder is ridiculous. They were not, if there were such people, and I don't doubt his testimony, they were not Dallas police, because they also got on a train. And that was parked there, and then the train pulls away. So that's the exit exit operandi to getting out of there was these guys got on a train, and the train pulled away. And the train was kind of interesting because it was observed from an upper floor of the depository, and I have that data, either in FBI reports or depositions. And these people on the 5th floor of the Texas School Book Depository, looking down, saw men with rifles on the roof of one of the trains. That ain't the Dallas police, let me assure you. And if it is, he should have filed a police report. So there was stuff going on with trains. The trains were involved in this thing in terms of getting some people out of there. Now, where they went, I don't know. I mean, we used to joke around among those of us who were researching on this case that they had to be paid. The assassins have to be paid. So sure, take this train and we'll, 2 miles up this track and we'll pay you. That's not what I think happened. I think that the reason people were on the roof of the train, and this is my own personal belief, is because, and I know this sounds bizarre, but I'm just going to tell you what it is, because the people that organized this thing, they come from Allen Dulles' generation, World War II and all that stuff. And I really believe that the model they were following when they asked the assassins to get on the train for the same damned idea that was used on the Jews and those things, get on the train, we're taking you to such and such location and you'll be safe. Of course, they gassed them on the train, right? I mean, that's what happened. And there were the trains that were going to the concentration camps. So that's what I think is going on. The shooters dressed as police. There were men on the roof of the train for a reason. I wouldn't be surprised if they dropped gas canisters into the train, and the train pulls away, and that's the last we know. Now, there's one other aspect to the train story that's very important, and that is that years ago, somebody who I was very close to but has since passed away was named Fred Newcomb. And Fred Newcomb, for a while we were very close, but the main point is he made a discovery. And he found something that was very important. And I'll never forget the phone call. He calls me up and he says, David, Do you have Life magazine for January 1967 in front of you? That has just been published with Connolly's story in it. Why President Kennedy went to Texas, and he's holding his cowboy hat, you know. He says, I want you to open this thing up. And inside were all these color photographs of the Bond slides, as I recall. And there was the Willis slide was also there. But he says, I want you to turn to page such and such. And I said, he says, you see the windows on the little circular monument, the semicircular monument on the Grassy Knoll. Remember that with the concrete white alabaster monument? And he says, now look at this other page over here. And he pointed out that the Bond slides showed a train, and the Willis slide showed no train. So we call that the train no train conflict, among the many conflicts in the Warren Commission records. And Fred and I both gave a lecture on this at Long Beach State. I remember that. And we had 2 screens with 2 projectors. And there was really a gasp in the audience. You know, there was a train and these pictures on one side, and there was no train on the other side. I don't know that I had the stuff of people on the roof of the train at that time. We had the pictures showing train, no train. But I don't know that we had fully developed, and certainly I don't remember fully developing the idea of gas canisters and all that. But that's what I believe happened. Because if police run on board a train, what are people doing on the roof of the train? It's right out of Schindler's List, you know, with the business of the way they murdered the Jews. And I think that's the mentality of the people that designed this thing. They had to get rid of the shooters, and they were dressed as police, most of them. And it makes sense that they're dressed as police. You know, it has the taint of being local authority. And then they run away. Zapruder says, the police were running behind me. There's a great interview with Zapruder. I have to tell you about this interview. That is not in the record. Now, I have an audio of it, but there was a very, very beautiful Berkeley undergraduate. And I'm pretty sure I know her name. And it doesn't matter to me now, because I suppose she's still around and she'd be much older, maybe 40 or 50 years older. But she was really quite beautiful and lovely. Her name was Barbara Bridges. So Barbara goes down with another fellow, and I forget his name. He published a couple of things under the auspices of Grassy Knoll Press. And he was one of the original 1965 researchers, right when the Warren Report came out. And Barbara interviews Zapruder. And, you know, she's a nice woman from Berkeley, very lovely looking. And she has the whole thing on tape, and I got a copy of this tape. And she says, well, Mr. Zapruder, the police that were running behind you, they were police from the motorcade? And Zapruder goes, well, where else would they be from? I mean, you know, that should have been part of one of the investigations. And I don't remember why it was not. But it's a great tape. And I think it gives away basically the MO. The assassins were dressed as police. They ran away. They got onto a train. Train pulls away. Train has been removed from the photographs given to the Warren Commission, which are the Willis slides, but is in the photographs that were not given to the Warren Commission, which are the Bond slides. So we used to give lectures, Willis versus Bond, and that's great. But I mean, I really think it gives away the kind of disguise that was used. Somebody dressed some people up as police. They were the assassins. If they weren't the assassins, and I think they were the security perimeter. The assassins just can't come up DEALEY PLAZA and say, oh, yeah, this is a good position. I think I'll shoot the president from behind this tree or behind this fence. You have to have a security corridor, you know. Somebody has to play the security role, because otherwise the assassins are going to miss. They're going to be very nervous, saying, hey, Jose, is it okay to shoot now? They have to have a security perimeter. And the police that Zapruder saw running behind him were that patrol. Now, by the way, just in the last week or two, I found some new stuff about Zapruder, which I did not know. Zapruder's had a brother named Israel Zapruder. If I'm not mistaken about this, and forgive me if I'm wrong, but I think his brother, on a train coming through Poland, when he was leaving the Soviet Union, they were all, you know, in Russia in the beginning. I believe his brother was pulled off the train and murdered right in front of him. That was not in the Warren Commission records or the FBI records, and I don't understand how they missed that. In other words, either Zapruder was so incurious or decided not to talk about it. Maybe he did, but it's a sort. I mean, how your brother was murdered. The FBI was criticized by for a lot of things, but when you interview Zapruder, I mean, you want to know about the film and all the rest of it and what you saw that day, but you would think their background investigation would include the fact that he came from Russia. Here's when he came over here. Here's the boat he came over here on, and he had a brother who was murdered on a train that was trying to make the transit from, as I recall, I don't know if it's called it, the Soviet Union, over to the port. But that's what happened. And I'm trying to remember where I learned this from. A source of valuable information about all of this, I believe, is the granddaughter, who's written a book called 26 Seconds, and she's unfortunately a big believer in the lone assassin theory. And she's in Maryland, I believe, and she's very interested in the Holocaust, and she collects stuff and has written, at least one important book, and maybe more than one. I don't know. But I wish people in the Zapruder family, it would have been good public relations, for them to be sympathetic. But also, on the other hand, I can argue with it differently, that if Zapruder saw what happened to Kennedy, which he did through his telephoto lens and everything, maybe you just don't mess around. You worry about your children, and you worry about, staying alive and all the rest of it. And the general idea would be that if they could do that to the president, you better watch what you're doing and saying. And the family is now, I don't know if you're aware, maybe your audience should be aware, that the original contract with Life magazine for that film was he got $40,000. But then the rest of the contract was not known for many years. Now, I got a copy of that original contract from Josiah Thompson, and it was amazing because the full sale price was not $40,000. It was $150,000. Yeah, and put that into today's money, so multiply at least by 6. So he got $150,000. Now, get this, $40,000 payable that weekend by Life magazine, and then another $40,000. I think it was on the 1st of January of '64, and then $25,000 every January 1st thereafter until the last year of the Johnson presidency. So the total price was $150,000. And pardon me if I don't have my numbers perfect, but I think it's $150,000 and 6 $25,000 payments. But the first one was made that weekend. And I think for some reason the first payment was $40,000, and I forget why. I think it has to do with certain matters about rights and foreign rights, maybe. And Doug Horn would know the answer to that, but I should really look it up. For years, I mean, this is the kind of stuff bread and butter that we ate and analyzed and tried to figure out what was going on. So that's how Zapruder was. Now, Gail Nix Jackson, was her full name. She, I think she wondered why it is that the Nix film they only got a much smaller amount of money. Now, by the way, when the ARRB got created in 1995, Assassination Records and Review Board, to go through all the documents, and a whole bunch of additional work was done. The Assassination Records Review Board was created. The decision was made, we can't have a private party owning this incredibly important filmed record of the United States history. So it was decided, they had people come in to look at it. How much do we owe the Zapruder family for this film? Because they could, as the government, they could take it away. And as you may know, or maybe you don't know, an auction, the experts decided what the true value was at auction, and it was $16 million. So the family was paid $16 million in approximately 1998 or 9. And that's what happened, and that's why it's today in a refrigerator at the National Archives. And the family got $16 million. Oh, there's another part of the story I have to tell you. The family got $16 million. but the tax on it would have been huge, right? Okay, but Zapruder had made 3 copies, okay? So he took one of those copies and donated it to the 6th floor museum. So now, when the accountant does his work, price was 16 million, but then he gets a tax deduction for this thing that he gave to the 6th floor museum in Dallas. And so he came out very well, you know, very smart guy. Well, of course, I mean, it's so obvious. You have a couple of copies and the sale price of the first establishes the market, right? 16 million.
Yes,
So
sir.
You give the other one for nothing. Anyway, these are these side stories. I had contact with Abraham Zapruder, not the original Zapruder, but I have 2 stories. I had contact with the Abraham Zapruder, the son, Abe Zapruder's, I think his name was Abe Zapruder, the junior, who, so we used to talk on the phone. He was at UCLA because I had to get permission to use his stuff. I wanted to use it on hard copy. What was even more amusing to me, anyways, is the experience of my mother, Helen, and my father, Al. So my mother insisted that they take at least, because he was a workaholic, take at least 2 weeks every year and go on some kind of vacation somewhere. And their thing was to go to Greece or Tokyo or whatever, and always visit the synagogues, because my father was into that, visit Jewish heritage and everything. So they're in Mexico City, or somewhere in Mexico, I think in Mexico City, and they're coming down in an elevator, and there's a woman on the elevator, and my mother hears the word Zapruder. So she says, "Are you Mrs. Zapruder of Dallas?" You know, so she says, "Yes." And so and he says, "Oh, my son is doing all this work and doing all this research on President Kennedy's assassination." And she said, "Well, yes, I'll talk to him and all that. But now let a year go by or some weeks. I forget what has. I call up Mrs. Zapruder on the phone. And she says, no, I don't want to talk to you. I don't want to talk to you." She says, "And besides, I have to see my hairdresser." so something like that. So I said, "Mrs. Zapruder, I needed to know, I wanted to know whether Abe sold them, how much did Abe get for this film that weekend?" This is when we were first learning about the prices. And she said, "Oh," and I said, "I wanted to know if he kept the original." And she says to me on the phone, I have a tape recording of this somewhere. I mean, I have the tape recording. It was very emphatic. She says, "Abe gave them the original. Abe gave it to them." That's the truth. So therefore, we lose the chain of possession on the film because Abe gave it to them. And then we get into the story of a optical printer in Dallas. And I don't remember the name of the company, but there was an optical printer company in Dallas that did editorial, had editorial clients. And I constantly forget their name. And I won't waste the time right now, but I was looking it up yesterday, and I don't know why I block on his name. But this guy, that's where they brought the film after it was processed. In other words, people don't understand, a lot of people don't understand the processing. Kodachrome is the thing that's in the camera is the original once they do the processing. So you walk away from the Kodachrome lab, and now he has the original. Plus, he needed to make copies of the original, and so he went to this other lab, which was in Dallas, and I forget the name of it. But that's how they got the 3 copies, 2 of which went to the Secret Service. And the Secret Service made a copy for the FBI, and one of them stayed in Zapruder's home that night or something like that. I forget. I may have these details wrong. But that Zapruder film, I am sure, without any question in my mind, and Doug Horner and I have done a lot of work on this, and I was first because that was before the committee. I mean, I figured this out in '68. That film was optically edited, on an optical printer. And the question is, where was this done? And for many years, many years, I thought, oh, well, they must have taken a jet. But this is my original thinking. They must have taken the jet, flown from Dallas to Rochester, where Kodak was located, and they have all kinds of equipment and everything, done the alteration and blah, blah, blah. That's not what happened at all. What happened is there was a company in Dallas that was prepared to do optical printing and editing. And I don't think this is an accident because there were 2, let me just say, this is going to strike you. Maybe you'll be skeptical, but I'm just telling you this is where I came out. There were two things that had to be altered to lie about this to history: the body of the president, that is, the autopsy had to be falsified, and films of the event. You could not have the body telling one story and the film telling another story. Okay, can't have the body. And so the body was altered prior to autopsy. Now there you have a 6-hour plane trip, and we can get into the story of when that was done. And there were all different kinds of hypotheses. The body was not altered at Parkland Hospital, but it may have been the process of alteration may have started in Dallas at the airport. But putting that aside, you have the body of the president, then you got the film. You can't have a filmed record which shows shots coming from the front and a body record showing. If you want to hide shots from the front, you have to hide two records: the filmed record and the body record. Body has to be altered prior to autopsy. The film has to be messed with too. If you don't mess with the film, two things are going to happen. The timing on the assassination can't be changed, and it's going to be much longer than 6 seconds, I can assure you. How do I know that? Because the car came to a halt. When I was in Dallas in '72, that's when I realized the importance of this. I think Vince Palomara, he compiled a list. I think his list is up to 65 witnesses who said the car stopped or severely slowed down. I know of about 15. There's no question the car stopped. Absolutely no question about it. The car stopped momentarily. I don't mean that it stopped and somebody, lit up a cigarette and took a smoke while they murdered Kennedy and then drove off. The car stopped. The velocity curve goes from, let's say, 10 miles an hour, slower and slower, and then there's a momentary stop, and then boom, he hits the gas and he's off. Okay, that stop has been removed from the Zapruder film. And so it's a gentle dip. And I think the next film shows it at, 10 miles an hour or 4 miles. But the Zapruder film does not show the stop. Now, when you're in Dallas, in 1972, I interviewed the Newmans. And I have great tapes of this. And this is before Bill Newman knew anything about the Zapruder film. So I'm in his home with my Sony tape recorder. That was a brand new tape recorder. It was cost quite a bit of money. And I'm recording this whole thing. And he talks about the car stopping. And I said, the car didn't stop in the Zapruder film. And I'd explained to him what the film was. He said, look, I don't care what that film shows. The car stopped. And then he turns to his wife and he says, didn't it stop, honey? And she says, yes, it stopped right in front of us. So that's Bill Newman and his wife who are hitting the ground. Remember, she's in the orange dress and they're lying on top of their little kids to protect them. So that's what happened with the car stop. The removal of the car stop in the beginning, it was very more than just puzzling. It was like, were they prepared? Was this crime planned in such a way that they're prepared to mess with the films? And the answer is yes, it was. Because you can't get to the film that fast and do what I'm talking about unless you're prepared to do it. So then the question became, how did they get the film so fast? And I was the one, I have the actual FBI reports. They put notices in every package of film that came out of Kodak or the other company there, Ansco. And they put notices, if your film contains the assassination, it was even better. If your film contains anything from Love Field to Dealey Plaza, call the FBI immediately. And that's how they got lists. There are these lists of FBI reports. And then they had an agent walking around in Dallas down Main Street, days and weeks later, looking, just using on the basis of gossip. Who had a camera? Who had a camera? What's his name? Where does he work? And they collected all this stuff. So that's how they did the collection. Once you see all these FBI reports, it's pretty impressive. So
that's a lot to take in. And Bill has been sitting there patiently. Bill,
I don't have anything to add to this.
What's that?
Other than the fact that I don't believe Oswald shot the president either. They did a paraffin test. There was no, gunpowder residue, and lots of other stuff.
How about him saying, "I didn't shoot anybody"?
Well, yeah, no, I understand that, but the scientific
here's
thing.
The best one. I don't know what dispatches you people have been given. I have committed no act of violence. That's Saturday afternoon. November 23rd.
And the first cops on the scene say it's a German Mauser, and they're holding it. It wasn't. He didn't shoot the president. That's all I got.
Let me ask you this, Bill, because this is a law question. Oswald was arrested, and he was asking for an attorney to step forward. He had no attorney to step forward, and yet he was still subjugated to an interrogation.
A lot of stuff would not have come into trial had this ever gone to trial.
Can you tell us something?
He said he wanted some. The next day, he said to Lou Nichols, the Bar Association said, "This is ridiculous. We have to send somebody down to talk to this guy." So Nichols testified. He talked to him. He says, and he said, Nichols said, "We can get you an ACLU lawyer." And he says, "Well, I don't want to do that right now, but I would need somebody who will appreciate the situation as I was in, and who thinks like I do, or something like that. And yes, if I found such a lawyer, I hope he would represent me."
So,
any comment on that, Bill?
No, I don't know what to say about this, other than the fact that a lot of this stuff would never have come into trial. So,
God bless Mark Lane. We both know Mark Lane, a friend of ours, passed away several years ago. But he told me that had he represented Oswald, Oswald would never, probably not even gone to court. There was just not enough evidence for him to be accused.
Yeah.
How do you guys? He said that. He told me that.
On one of your shows?
Yes. Yeah. I'd be happy to send you the link. No worries at all.
Yeah, that's very nice. No, that's...
Yeah. Okay.
There's a lot of stuff, there's you can
sure,
talk
go ahead,
for
Bill.
years. No. David's done a great job today. He's told us a lot of stuff that no one knows about. It's going to be coming out in his book. This is his story. At some point in time, we can talk about my story. But, so okay. That's all I have right now.
How did you guys meet, by the way?
I read Best Evidence, and I was totally blown away. And I wrote a letter to David. I called up I sent it to the publisher to forward it to him. And my question was, why haven't the Kennedys jumped up and down about this? And I forget what the verbiage is, but that was the thing with because of this evidence that has come out. And David wrote me back and said, that's something that is kind of a stranger. I forget what his terminology was. He didn't know, but they wanted to keep it quiet for whatever reason. And he had sent me the return address was his address in Brentwood, I believe at the time.
Really?
Or Santa Monica. And so I somehow got a hold of him. I don't know whether I wrote him a letter and said, "This is my phone number. I'd love to talk to you." Or I was able in those days, you're in the phone book, whatever it was. And I called him up and invited him over for dinner at my home in Sherman Oaks. And that's kind of how we started our relationship way back when. So.
Okay, but listen, I have to interrupt here, and before I forget this, as to what about Robert Kennedy? Now, what was my position? Because I know much more now. What was my position on Robert Kennedy when we first met and you brought this up? Like, what about the Kennedys?
Yeah, David, it's so long ago. It was just like it was something that you didn't have an answer for me. Is basically what you said. Yeah, you didn't have an answer, and it was kind of strange that since he was the Attorney General at the time and this and that. That was kind of the extent of it. It was just very short reply.
Okay, because later it became very clear, and I'm trying to remember when the church committee, well, first of all, I figured this out before the church committee, I think. But when the church committee report came out, volume 6 or 7, do you remember what it had, the dynamite that was buried in there? I don't know if you remember. The dynamite that was buried in there was the question of the U.S. plots to assassinate Castro.
Oh, yes.
Which it turns out that Robert Kennedy was up to his neck in these plots. And that's the reason why what they had on not the Kennedys, what they had on Robert Kennedy was that he was part of plots to assassinate Castro, the darling of the left. And if he had said, I'm just telling you this right now, if on November 22nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, whatever, if he had said, I have a public statement to make about why about the assassin, or the person they say is the assassin. Before I get to that, I want to tell you all something. I worked with the CIA on plots to murder Castro. Then everybody would say, what? You could get lost and curse words and the horse you came in on. We don't want to hear this. But that was totally, those plots totally neutered RFK politically. That was the big dark secret. And remember, he's assassinated in 68. And so by the time this stuff came out, we're talking about 1976 or whatever, so that's years later. But that's what they had on Bobby Kennedy. He was involved in the plots to kill Castro, and it would have absolutely upset the public image of the Kennedys, which meant a lot to them in history. And I can tell you what John Kennedy's answer would have been, because I've studied and read all the books on this. His answer would have been, look, we got by the skin of our teeth with the Cuban Missile Crisis, but we can't have a situation where this guy is going to have Soviet missiles installed in Cuba, which can reach New York and Miami and every place else, with ease. And I think that that's the reason that he was involved in plots to kill Castro. Nobody made this up. There was a name for that committee, but it was, and I forget that there were 3 people on it. There were initials for that committee. Enough time has gone by that my memory is getting.
Yeah.
But I don't
Brent,
remember that. Huh?
I was going to tell Brent. I've got one story to tell about this. When I got into this, and I was, practicing law and calling people way back when, and I got a hold of Harper, the kid that found the occipital bone in the back of his head in the grass, and gave it to his uncle, who was the pathologist at SMU, and blah blah blah. And I've talked to him before, but had a nice long talk with him. And I said, he said, I had photographs. He said, I took my own photographs of this, And I said, really? I said, where are those? He says, they're in a safe deposit box, and I don't talk about it anymore because of all of the deaths that have occurred.
That's right. That spooked everybody. Yeah.
It spooked him. It spooked him. So he never wanted to talk. But he said, I've got a photograph that I've personally took, or his uncle took, because his
uncle identified it as a occipital bone too.
Yeah. This is hocus pocus.
I held it in my hand.
Yes. Yeah. Absolutely. So anyway. There you go.
Why that's important, folks, I should let you know. The occipital bone is from the back of the head, which means a frontal shot. The exit shot would be the back of the head, which means a frontal shot, right? Beyond the question of a death. Please go ahead.
Everything you just said is absolutely true. But let me just point out, you're talking about conspiracy. If you made an equation, conspiracy equals second assassin, occipital bone. The better way, the more powerful way to look at it is conspiracy. And no, occipital bone means the X-rays at the National Archives are false.
Absolutely.
Words, what you're really dealing with is the falsification of the X-rays that were given to the Kennedy family, unless the Kennedy family was told, look, this was a Castro plot to kill President Kennedy. This crazy guy, Oswald, and he's trying to kill President Kennedy because we were trying to knock off Castro. So, therefore, we have to make this look like one assassin. In other words, I don't know which version you want to go with, but the X-rays given to the Kennedys have an occipital. And I was with Dr. Wecht when he first went to the archives in 1971. And I have a whole bunch of, then we had a meeting, there were about 10 people around a conference table that evening. We were all talking about it, but this occipital bone is really important because it shows the X-rays were falsified.
I didn't know that. You just taught me something. Here I am thinking I know a lot of it. And every time we go down that rabbit hole, right, there's another tunnel that we don't know anything about, at least in my case. So thank you for bringing that.
No, sure. And this is, we used to, what I used to say in lectures, you can't have the occipital bone, have the X-ray up on the screen, which is a public document. You can't have the occipital bone on the X-ray here in Washington, and the occipital bone lying on grass on Dealey Plaza, This is like the joke
And
about
that was found that he found that the next day in the afternoon, just walking through the grass.
Oh yeah, yeah. Yeah, we had all kinds of dark jokes about Dallas is a violent place, and you never know whose occipital is being blown off when there's some poor guy that gets shot going through Dealey Plaza. But no, that was really bad. It was really bad, and he immediately showed it to his uncle. And then he went to and the uncle maybe gave it to the FBI, but there was a batch of FBI reports, like at least 10 or 12, 15 pages long. I have a 22-page memo about the occipital bone, which I wrote. This is back before the HSCA, and I'm sure I gave it to them. Yeah, that's one of the, very important anomalies. And that proves basically, what I would say is forget second assassin, it proves the x-rays are false. That's the really important fact. The x-rays are false if that's occipital bone.
Couple of quick things. You testified at the HSCA as well, House Committee on Assassinations, back in the late 70s. And also I want to touch on Oliver Stone's new documentary he's just brought out, because you were, in fact, part of the first movie, JFK. You helped Oliver with some information for that. Maybe you could talk about that for us.
Well, yeah, I can. Look, Oliver has his own style and his own goals, and he had to make a decision. I was telling this to friends recently. He had to make a decision when he went to make a movie, like this movie now called Reclaiming History or something. Do you know the name of it? Is it Reclaiming History?
It's JFK 2
revisiting.
It's Through the Looking Glass was the official name, but it's based on Jim DiEugenio's book.
Well, that's where I'm coming to.
Yes.
He has to cover his tush. He has to buy a book on which he claims he's making the film. So you buy movie rights. That's what it's called, movie rights. Now, you have to look at this. My book is about the medical evidence. It's all about it. It's very definitive. I haven't read Jim DiEugenio's book in years. It's called Destiny Betrayed. I don't know that it deals with the medical. Does it? I don't know that it does. But the point is that if you want to be very generous about this, he would say, okay, I'm going to make this movie, Reclaiming History. And David Lifton's book is, based his life on the medical evidence and all the stuff, best evidence, 4 different publishers, Macmillan, Carolyn Graff, Dell and paperback, and I forget the other one, Signet. 4 publishers. You'd say, okay, I have to go to Lifton and get movie rights. And now, if Jim DiEugenio's book deals with the medical, and I don't remember right now if it does, you'd say, okay, I'll pay these 2 guys money, I'm going to approach him and give each one $5,000 or whatever, because with the first movie, I think he paid me $5,000. Anyway, I'm going to give each guy money, and so they'll be happy, and I'll have the rights to do anything I want with either book or some combo. He doesn't do that. For reasons that are beyond me, but have a lot to do with Oliver Stone's psyche and the fact that he's taking credit as if he's the first responder. He was there first. He wasn't. So he leaves me out completely, absolutely completely. And he buys the rights to Jim DiEugenio's book, I guess. I don't know what the contract looks like, but clearly he made a deal with DiEugenio. So it tells me a lot about Oliver Stone's psychology. And I was on the Joe Rogan show, I think it's Joe Rogan, some months ago. And he had Oliver Stone on by video conference or something. And he says, well, have you heard of David Lifton? And Stone has this, I wish I could have captured a screen capture of it. Stone has this big grin. They don't call it a grin. When I was at Cornell, there was a couple of adjectives before the word grin. But he had this grin. He says, yes, I've heard of him. I don't understand why Oliver Stone isn't big enough to proceed in a normal fashion. He doesn't have to choose my book over the next one. Buy both of them. Do something. But you don't do what he did. There's something really small-minded, and it has to do with his ego. And I mean, over in Europe, they don't care. They don't probably even know how to pronounce DiEugenio. I mean, maybe they do. And my name was changed from some name that was different when my father and his 4 brothers were in Russia, and they changed it to the more neutral Lifton. But anyway, he didn't have to do that. But it tells you something about him. And I don't know what else to say about it. I mean, I'll never quite understand it, but I have to admit that it's because of Oliver Stone that we got the ARRB. I mean, that's his big contribution to history, and I'll be the first to admit it, was to cause the ARRB. The ARRB led to declassifications that nobody had before, and documents. And a lot of this has to do with the the secret mail opening program, H.T. Lingwell. Anyway, the point is, it was a good thing that Oliver Stone got involved because nobody else was going to make a movie about this. But he sure did, and that's where we are.
And your involvement with the HSCA, House Select Committee on Assassinations?
Yeah. Well, I remember. I don't remember the details of the involvement. I worked with Andrew Purdy, who was in charge of the medical evidence. Arlen Specter was the medical evidence person for the Warren Commission. Andy Purdy was the similar position as an attorney. The big difference was that by that time we had the x-rays and photographs, and Purdy's issues were different. What happened to the wound at the back of the head, says Purdy. And we used to have conversations about it because there was a fork in the road. One was to say the photographs were altered. That was Robert Grodin's view of things. The pictures were altered. The other way was saying that the body was reconstructed. In other words, they had funeral people there after midnight, and they put the back of the head, put a piece of scalp on or something, and that's where those photos come from. And I don't remember my position on that way back and forth over the years, whether it was a photo forgery or a body forgery to get those rear pictures. But that's what was going on. That's the story of that. They falsified the photo evidence. I mean, there's no question that 13 people at Parkland Hospital, see the wound at the back of the head. There's no question it's there. Oh, and the other part of it is, at the bottom of the brain, tucked underneath the brain, is like the operation center for your whole brain. It's called the cerebellum. Yeah. And the anesthesiologist, Dr. Jenkins, talks about it in his report that day, that the cerebellum was torn and shredded or blasted or whatever. The cerebellum on the pictures is fine, thank you, Yeah. So that's part of the business of the phoning of the pictures.
And I think Nurse Bell, if I'm not mistaken, I think it was Nurse Bell also saw it. And I know Robert McClellan told me he saw it too. Dr. Robert McClellan. We
interviewed Nurse Bell and for the documentary film project we did. I spent hours with her. Yes, it's all on camera. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're very good quotes and everything because she talked about Dr. Perry saying because she couldn't see when she entered the room, she couldn't see where the wound was because it was at the bottom of the back of the head. Perry said, no, come over here. And he put the scalp aside or something. And she said, the rear of his head was missing and stuff, quotes like that.
Must have been an incredibly, I don't know how to put it, beyond words, the horror that those folks went through. And to think that his wife came in after with a piece of JFK's brain in her hand and said, will this help to the doctors? Right, like just the insanity of that moment. David, I meet a lot of people, a lot of young people. They have never heard of JFK. They have never heard of Bobby. They've never heard of Dr. King. How do we keep this going for a new generation that doesn't care? I don't know how else to put it. They care about Angry Birds. They care about the latest millennial challenge, eating pods or whatever. What's going on with our youth? Why are they so disengaged? Why are they so disconnected? Well, 33% of millennials have never heard of the Holocaust. Well over 50 now have never heard of Auschwitz. What are we doing?
I don't know. I'm tempted to say if you never heard of the Holocaust, go watch Shoah. I mean, you probably saw Shoah. There were 15 parts of it, or 14. I forget I saw all of it. I mean, I saw it alone in a room with I was living in Brentwood, and I was crying my eyes out and everything, watching this stuff. Just amazing. And you may remember some of those people. The show was made by that French filmmaker. I forget his name, but he was famous for this documentary. Not that he didn't do other beautiful work, but this was really important. And I don't know. He interviewed the people who cleaned up after the gas was in the room. I don't know if you saw that, but they had to take the bodies and get them away, and then they had to clean up, and then they have a new group of people would come into the room and give the same bullshit story about they're cleaning out their bodies or they're taking a shower, and then they they lock them in there, and the gas comes in, and people are screaming and all the rest, and then 10, 15 minutes later you have a pile of bodies to be disposed of. The Holocaust is a whole other thing. The Holocaust is also as unbelievable as the Kennedy assassination is. In that sense, they're both what I call these mega events. People find it hard to believe that there's really a high-level plot in Kennedy's assassination involving the alteration of his body to change the story of how he died. The same thing with the show business. People find it hard to believe that such a thing could be plotted and executed. But it was. That's history.
Bill, this show that we're doing tonight will not be monetized on YouTube. And I don't really care. I'm not going to make a dime off this show. I haven't been making any money off YouTube for years now. They have a whole new policy.
That's a shame.
It's heartbreaking because 90% of millennials get their news, believe it or not, from YouTube.
What's their new policy? I don't understand what.
Their new policy is that anything is controversial, they will not monetize it, which means any content you make. I've made documentaries on Holocaust survivors. We're just talking about the Holocaust.
Yeah.
So what it's telling me as a content maker, don't bother doing important shows like this. Go ahead and make cat videos, makeup videos. God knows I could use a makeup job, but anyways, just saying. Anything that is controversial will not be monetized, like my interview with Mrs. Reich, who was in the camps with Anne Franks. Okay, I'm going to do the shows anyways.
Mrs. Wright, when he Mrs. Wright was in the...
Mrs. Reich is her name, Lydia Reich, and she was 14 years old. She was taken to Belsen, and
What?
that's where she met Anne Frank. And so it's an important show, and it proves that Anne Frank was a real person as well. A lot of people say it was the Holocaust, and Anne Frank was just a hoax. Yeah, and it goes on and on. All that to say, Bill, is they've taken, when your show is demonetized, they also take it out of Google search.
Out of the what?
Only Google search, because Google owns
Really?
YouTube. Yes. So the only way you can happen upon this show is by accident or subscribing to my channel. So please do subscribe if you're watching right now. Once again, I'm not making any money off this.
And a lot of people follow David on Facebook when he says something, and blah blah blah. A lot of people pop up and go, oh, well, we're waiting for this, waiting for that. So this might be something, David, you might want to let people know in one of your Facebook notices that you've done a great show with Brent Holland show.
Oh, sure, I'd be glad to.
Thank you. I guess my question to you, Bill, is ultimately, where does the First Amendment end and where does YouTube pick up? Because obviously this disconnect is going on and on. It's getting worse and worse and worse. Yeah,
well, they've taken over what your First Amendment rights are. For YouTube, I really think down the road here, there's going to be a major
class action.
Yes, there's going to be something that's going to be coming down the pike here on this, and I hope so, because they're just stifling free speech, and shows like this, shouldn't be stifled. The knowledge that David has and everything else, people should know about. So, but the people running Google don't want you to know this. The people running, Facebook don't want you to know about this stuff. So, for whatever reason, I'm glad I lived in the years that I lived, and it's going to be this is not a fun time. So, anyway, David, thanks for coming tonight.
Thank you so much. Yeah, we're going to wrap up.
Finally, we got him on Skype.
What's that?
Well, we'll do this again. There's no question.
Yeah, now that you got the Skype, David, there won't be a problem.
I have no problem.
What changed November 22nd, 1963, David? And then I'll ask Bill the same question. Are we ever going to be able to get that back?
Yeah, I'll answer that.
Sure, Bill. Go ahead.
Yeah, I those days are long gone. You know, looking at what's going on today and what people are upset about, and those days are long gone. You know, and so it's and the kids today. You know, there's a big disconnect. You know, they'll never understand, and you know how society worked and the fun that people had way back, you know, in the 50s and the 60s, and how easy it was to live, and the thing, you know, but this political correctness and this everything else that's swirling, and I could say a lot more.
It was all pre-internet.
Yeah. It's tearing this country apart. So, you know.
David, what was it that JFK represented to you? What was the main thing he represented?
I just liked him because of his sense of life, and he was like so preppy. I mean, look, I was naive, obviously. I went to Cornell. The person that I was always suspicious of, unfortunately, was Lyndon Johnson, because you could see it in 1960. And I remember watching that convention or parts of it, and I said, this just doesn't make any sense. What is JFK choosing this man that obviously is like somehow out of Shakespeare or something, very dangerous character to be his vice president? But as far as what JFK, let's see, I don't want to lose the obvious, which was I was on the moon program, and Kennedy had said, let's go to the moon. And that is really a huge deal. I'll never forget when we were watching the at Cornell in the Student Union, one of those original flights that was suborbital, and it didn't, you know, went up and it came down in the water and stuff like that. And maybe there was the one where he circled the Earth. There was one where on Christmas Eve, 1968, where they orbited the moon and were reading from the Bible or something. It was very moving, but I forget which one was that. But what JFK meant to me was the moon program, and the idea that he should set such a goal. And that later, when I read books about his presidency, it turns out that the Bay of Pigs was such a failure and an embarrassment that he asked his aides, come up with something that I can announce, almost like a distraction, to give the country a new goal that we were all looking for. And I forget who it was that, it may have been Lyndon Johnson, by the way, because he was in charge of the subcommittee on the space program. But anyway, and he said, yeah, let's do that. And he made the decision, and then he gave that speech. If I got the dates wrong, was it in the summer of 62 in Austin, or was it 61? I don't remember.
He gave two speeches. One was a public speech. The other one was in front of Congress. But they were much the same, and I can't remember the date either. I would think it was in 63 that he said, let's go to the moon.
No, definitely 62. Sorry.
62? Okay. Why go to the moon? Because these things are hard.
Yeah, he talked about
everybody together.
He had the vision to understand.
Yes.
That was something, that we're tossing our hat over there into space, that it was the future. He really did have the vision. And people that followed and became the first group of astronauts, they all had the same vision too. They shared that.
To have a president with a vision again.
Huh?
Yeah. To have a president with a vision once again is I hope I see that before I pass. Somebody of JFK's ilk, and Dr. King, of course, and then Bobby. And the kids today, I try to tell them that for those that knew those three publicly, I mean, here I am, a Canadian, and I know all JFK's speeches.
Yeah.
You know, ask not. And the rest of them, you know, there's busts of JFK in every city in the country. And this is Canada. There's streets.
He was a historian.
Oh, my goodness.
A writer and a historian. And if he hadn't run for office, his father He said, this is in the memoirs. His father
Yeah.
would have bought him a newspaper, and he would have been a publisher of a newspaper.
Yeah. Yeah. So, listen, I want to thank you both so much.
Absolutely.
Merry Christmas, Happy
Yes.
Hanukkah, and Assalamu Alaikum. And got all three in there, I think. So I think we're good. Listen, everybody watching, have a pleasant, happy holiday, and stay safe. And we'll talk to you soon. I'm Brent Holland from the Brent Holland Show.
Thank you, Brent.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you very
Bye-bye.
much, Brent. Thank you.
Thank you.